being strategic with the ways of the world and using that for kingdom and eternal purposes is like part of the game that we play as Christians in how we think about, some of these like worldly business strategies and such. And then it says, for the children of this age, so essentially like unbelievers, are more shrewd, are better at taking care of their like earthly well-being than believers are. Like what? Okay, so this is kind of a different, I guess all my videos are kind of different and kind of weird, but this is also a particularly weird video. But my hope is that even if you're not in the YouTube space, or maybe you are a creative, or you're a business owner, or you are in a business, or whatever calling you have, my hope is that this will maybe inspire you to think creatively and strategically for the kingdom, or intentionally in such a way that you're reminded that being a Christian makes everything different about how you work and how you do life and who you ultimately serve. Like it says in scripture, work heartily as for the Lord and not for men, because you're serving the Lord Christ. Like that changes everything when you know that that Christ is your ultimate boss. Anyways, hopefully in talking about my own, whatever it may be, strategizing, thinking through YouTube differently from a Christian perspective, that it also inspires you to think differently about your own callings, or maybe ways that you can think about how things are different because you're a Christian. How does that make your day-to-day operations, the way you do metrics, the way you run your meetings, the way you treat your teams different? So I will break this up into chapters because there's actually a lot that I'm trying to cover, and I have notes here because I am in a health flare and brain fog is pretty bad. So without further ado, chapter 1. So I titled this on 10 years of waiting. And actually, I can't even say that I did this intentionally differently because I didn't have a choice in the matter. This was totally God's orchestration and God's doing. So I can only credit him for that. But I just wanted to say that if you are in this, you may not even know you're in a waiting period, because I did not know. But if you are in this kind of awkward in-between where you feel like you're called to something, or you feel like you have this irresistible calling or urge that the Lord's not opening doors for, I don't know your story. You probably won't know until later. But even in this waiting period, or this in-between period, it is truly not a waste. And looking back, I can 100% say that even with the little that I know now, and looking back, he was 100% using all of that, all of those 10 years of sanctification, of planning and prepping in ways that I didn't even realize was planning and prepping for this channel to be birthed now. I know 100% that if I had started any earlier, my channel would not look the way it does now. Not that it has, not that it has a certain distinct look to it, or maybe it doesn't look any different than any others, but internally I know, in terms of motivations, in terms of what's driving it, in terms of my mission statement, my vision statement, who I'm trying to serve, like all of those things would look so different. I think even my mannerisms would look different. I think especially a while ago, there would be a lot more of me trying to be what I think a YouTuber should look like. And me just being in my 30s, the beauty of being in your 30s is, I call it the don't care energy. Like you literally do not care. And you just are like, this is me. What can I say? With all my sarcasm and quirks and all of that. And I think that's been helpful actually for this channel, but I don't think I could have done that if I started any earlier. And I think the Lord, I know the Lord knew that. And also the Lord had to just sanctify me in so many ways, in my character, and being ready for all that this quote unquote industry has to offer in its good, but also its negative, large negative sides of it. All these things he was prepping me for, and I didn't even realize. And now that I'm in it, I'm just so grateful for those 10 years. And so rather than thinking of the waiting periods as an obstacle or something holding you back from just starting or doing it now, I actually, a lot of YouTube advice, they're like, just start, just pick up the camera and start. And I think there is some wisdom to like, you'll never be fully ready, and the Lord may be calling you to just start and to take that leap of faith. They say delayed obedience is a kind of disobedience, and there's truth to that. But I think there's also a caution in not jumping and going before the Lord and making sure that the Lord is going before you in your calling, in the direction and in the timing that he wants you to be in. Because now that I look at things, the timing was perfect. I felt like he had for a couple years showed me that the door was about to open and that the door was opening, but he was telling me like, not yet. And then all of a sudden, I felt like he was saying, all right, now's the time, go. It reminds me of that reel where it's like, God's like, all right, hold my hand. And you're like, okay. And then I think the caption is like, what it's like to follow God or something. And then he's like, all right, now go. And the person's like, oh my gosh. And they're like barely hanging on.
Grab my hand. Now we wait. We wait for that. Now we go. Keep holding my hand. Keep holding my hand. Keep moving.
That's what it felt like when there was that sudden go. I knew I had to go, but I didn't feel ready. You'll never feel ready. At the same time, until there was that go, and again, all of this is hard to discern. It's really between you and God. But before he said go, if I had jumped any sooner, I might have been caught in some issues or just not have been ready for the negative aspects of YouTube or the ways in which it would lead to, let's say, building my own kingdom or these other ways that you can easily fall astray. So some of the things that happened in these 10 years, it's endless, but for sure there was a huge shift in vision, a huge shift in even thinking about like target audience, or in translation, in kingdom translation, like who am I trying to serve? Just to give a little example, in the beginning, I really thought of YouTube as a creative outlet because I love video editing. I love the whole process of storyboarding and creating videos and filming and learning about lighting and all these things, editing and adding little tricks in your editing and learning little fun effects and such. But even though I love all of that, at the end of the day, our gifts are meant to steward, yes, to glorify him and to enjoy him in that way, but they're also meant to use for others. And I think that others part became such a strong conviction for me in how much our giftings and things he's given us to steward are meant for others. And that's in everything. Even my seminary education, I went to seminary to be equipped because I thought, hey, if I get this degree that is meant for pastors, like I would be able to be equipped for almost anything that comes at me, whatever the Lord has for me. But then I started to realize that me being equipped with this education, that itself is meant for others, not for me to just enjoy in my own individual spiritual walk. That should definitely help you individually too. But ultimately, there's so many scripture passages that talks about how all these things are for others. Even the sufferings you have and the comfort that you're given for your sufferings is like meant for others. And I think that's so beautiful in 2 Corinthians, how it talks about that. But anyways, that's one example of the ways that he had to sanctify my vision for this channel and what it would ultimately be. Other things were in this process. I did a lot of research, and I'll go into this later, and studying YouTube and YouTubers and strategy and all this stuff, all these things. And I had made very clear boundaries of what I wanted and didn't want, what I felt convicted in doing versus not doing. Where am I going to draw the lines? Why do I feel that way? What biblical principles are going to be guiding me? Like I was able to think about all these things and mull over these things for years, even though it was more like a thought exercise because I never knew God would actually allow me this season. But as a thought exercise, these were all helpful things for me to be building up, whatever it may be, guidelines, boundaries for this in the meantime. Chapter 2. Even from choosing the platform itself, for me, it's always been YouTube because, I mean, when I was younger, that's all we had. we didn't have Instagram, we didn't have TikTok, we didn't have these things. And YouTube was like the new thing. But I think thinking about things in a more purposeful sense, especially in these past couple years, I've been seeing such the detriment of short form content, dopamine hits, what scrolling is encouraging. And I did wrestle with, do I really want to be a part of that? I am the type to think of things as being not inherently bad in a sense that you could steward these things for good. Even short form content, even, all these things, AI, whatever it may be, you can steward them for good for sure. But it just didn't align. I think there are some people meant to be in that space for sure, 100%. But just for me, it didn't align with what I was convicted of in terms of how he's made me and what I was trying to pursue when it comes to wanting depth and wanting more long form, wanting discussions, wanting people who are interested in nuance and wanting to take things a little bit more slowly. I guess what helps with that is that YouTube was always my favorite, and I just love that process of video editing and learning about video, particularly in longer form. I've learned to enjoy short form for sure. I love that editing style, and I've gotten kind of used to that style as well. But in the ultimate sense, in what I was convicted of and trying to do, YouTube and longer form content, more thoughtful, discussion-oriented content was the way that I wanted to go, and the kind of people that I wanted to serve, and the kind of people I wanted to interact with and have a community with. What comes along with this is thinking through, okay, when you think of your content ecosystem, how are you going to interact with each of these mediums? How will you use these or not? And so for me, I had made the decision early on, which is why I reserved the channel names and such early on, that YouTube would be my main. I wanted that to be my main community. And then community as in in the content space, not like your true real life church community. And then I wanted to use short form because I realized that long form, it takes a lot of effort and a lot of time. And sometimes it takes a while before you actually have something produced. And so it's more of a marathon. And because you kind of sometimes want these smaller practice, smaller ways to practice or smaller ways to produce and create, that's more day to day. That's what I decided to use Instagram for. So that's actually why I started being more active on Instagram first, because that was all I could handle at the time. I knew there was no way, given my responsibilities in work, ministry, everything else, and my health and all of this stuff, that I could handle actually diving into YouTube. And God hadn't really opened that door yet. So I went first to Instagram, and that still remains, where Instagram is kind of my day-to-day creative outlet / reflections. And YouTube is what I consider my main or more serious priority in calling. Chapter 3. So this is about my convictions of having the mission be the foundation, the mission being what drives my, whatever you want to call it, strategy or my content and all of that. I won't go into the details of what exactly that is, what my exact mission vision statement is. In the ultimate sense, it's to help others to glorify God and enjoy Him forever, and myself too. But the reason why I made this very clear distinction is because truly what you make your purpose for your content or for whatever you're doing, you don't even realize the ways that ripple effects into how that drives decisions you make everywhere else in your operations, in how you come across in your content or in your teams or the metrics you track, things like that. So I distinguish, some people want to use YouTube for monetization, and that's fine. If that's their main goal, that's fine. There are good ways to do it. There's bad ways to do it. If you want to really help and serve others and add value and monetize, it's win-win-win. That's great. But I purposely made that distinction earlier on because I did not want that to get mixed into my purpose. I did not want my content to ever be subservient to the need for certain kind of number of views or subscribers or these metrics that I do think they're helpful, but if I have a certain mission that's not monetization, that's not going to be my ultimate goal. So that would give me the freedom of the burden of being able to post things that I feel convicted to post, even if it's only going to get a couple of views, even if everyone's going to unsubscribe and cancel me because I said something that I was convicted of or I felt was biblical truth that needed to be heard. I don't know, whatever it may be. I just did not want to mix those worlds. So I made a very clear distinction. I'll talk about monetization a little bit more next because I'm not against it. I'm just saying that that's not the primary vision. That's not the primary mission behind my channel. I would say it's not even secondary, but just making sure I have those priorities straight. I also know that, some people might say, hey, it's both. It's both mission and monetization. But in business school, I actually studied social enterprise. I studied many things, but one of these like pockets of things I studied was social enterprise because I was very fascinated by the model of having kind of these entities that are meant to feed into each other. You have your nonprofit arm that's like your missional arm, and then you have this like business side that helps feed the nonprofit arm, and it almost looks like this ideal system. But through studying various case studies and even myself interning at one, I just started to see that when you have these two entities that have very different goals and you kind of mesh them together into one entity, it creates a lot of confusion and it creates a lot of compromise. Like one side ends up having to compromise and be subservient to the other's mission. And it's really hard to find a model where it works kind of ideally in the mission being able to truly be about the mission, and then the enterprise side or the money-making arm being able to do that well without sabotaging the mission or vice versa. It's like two horses that are going in different directions, but like attached at the hip. There's caution needed there. It's not that it can't be done, but it's very difficult. So for me, I just didn't want to create any of that confusion of like, oh, it's a little bit of both, but just be very clear that my purpose here is missional. Hence, being very well aware that I'm going to have to think through the tent making side of my life, right? If I really am not going to depend on this side for monetization. But more on that in the next chapter, chapter 4. On monetization, like I said, wanted to be clear that that's not the main goal. It's not to say I won't be thinking about the financial side, because I think you have to be wise and you have to think about sustainability, because all of this costs money. Like it costs money for me to have this mic. It costs money for lighting, for cameras, for hosting things, for the music you want to use, whatever it may be. And these are things that I purposely invested in using my own personal funds that I like tucked away every month and purposely said those funds are meant for this mission, even though it's like huge losses, quote unquote, if you were to look at the financial side of things, because I invested in buying books and video editing things and all of this stuff to invest in this channel. If the Lord were to bless with finances, like bless this channel, let's say, that's something that I would not be like, oh no, I'm not going to accept that. I would gladly steward it. I just never want that to be the driving decision behind my content. And again, to reiterate, this is not to say that if you're doing content and you want, that's your purpose to monetize and the Lord has blessed you with that and financial prowess to like make this a part of your tent making, that's great. I'm just going by my own convictions and prayers over the years of what I felt like was meant for me. I think everyone has their different callings and convictions that they have to follow. So I'm not saying this is a cookie cutter model by any means, just sharing kind of the thought process and how these things have developed. As I kind of mentioned before, for me, I wanted the freedom from the burden of monetization and freedom from the burden of creating for the sake of views or for the sake of the algorithm and things like that. I wanted to feel free to do what I felt called to do in helping others through exploring life in a biblical worldview, which is kind of part of my mission statement. And I didn't want the temptation to distract from that purpose. So that's a decision that I made out of my own convictions. But even still, I think it's wise to come up with a game plan should God bless you with certain things. So for me, even though I'm kind of separating out the monetization or like finances part from the mission or distinguishing it in a way, I did come up with like a plan. If He were to bless it, this is how I would want to allocate the funds at this milestone, etc. Because I think if you're ill prepared for certain things that come your way, you could easily get lost in it. Like you see people who suddenly get a lot of money, who suddenly get a lot of fame, who suddenly get a lot of power or whatever it may be. Human nature, like we are not very good, I should say, at handling that. So for me as a planner, I just want to be guarded and I want to make sure I have plans in place. So as an example, if the Lord were to bless us monetarily, the first line is my school loans, because I felt so convicted and sure that the Lord called me to business school and to seminary, despite me not having an income really prior to that, just being a Peace Corps volunteer for 3 years and some other random things before that. I really felt like he was calling me to go to business school and seminary, and felt confident that he would provide for me. So if he's going to use this channel to potentially help with that, that would be something that I feel like is part of his provision in that calling. And then I have different tiers for like, okay, once that's covered, if the Lord chooses to do that, here's how much I would want to allocate to like certain ministries that I've been blessed by that I want to contribute to. Here's how much I would want to apportion to this category of my life, how much I would want to portion to another category. I think it's good to have those kind of boundaries set in place so that you're not tempted to just use it all for unhelpful purposes, should I say. Another thing I wanted to add is, now that I'm more behind the scenes of this kind of content creation side of things and seeing what it's like, especially when it comes to like affiliate programs and things like that, you start to see why certain products or certain types of products or certain brands are like pushed quite aggressively in the online space. And that's another thing that I wrestled with in seeing certain creators online who are just, it seems like they're just pushing certain things that may not even be really helpful or may not even be things that they really like. And seeing even some, I think there was a Christian YouTuber actually who admitted that she just didn't like the direction she was going in because she kind of felt like she sold out and was just doing brand deal after brand deal just for the financial side of things, with things that she wasn't even really crazy about. I just, did not want to get mixed up in that. Like, I think, especially if you're looking at this, like, this is going to pay my rent, this needs to pay the bills, there will be that temptation and pressure. So now that I'm on this side of things, I am thankful for those decisions because I could see why that could be so tempting. And then lastly, I will say that, like I said, you do have to be responsible. And for me, I do want to think sustainably. So I'm not trying to just live off the streets doing YouTube, but I do have to think about that. Like, how do I sustain the costs and the time that goes into these videos? I know it doesn't look like much, but these videos take a lot of time. It's pretty much like a full-time job, if not more, just to produce one video if you want a certain level of quality, even though, I know it doesn't look like that. But, you got to figure out, how are you going to make that work? And how are you going to do the tent making side? And how are you going to follow Paul's words in Thessalonians where it says to not be dependent on anyone, right? And to aspire to live quietly and work with your hands, and basically like, don't be dependent on others and make your own money and take care of yourself, That is a side that I am also thinking through, though just not at this stage. There's a runway that I have for that. Next chapter, chapter 5. Okay, so this part is interesting because during this waiting period, I had a lot of time actually to do research, and I was like seriously obsessed. So I'm doing research on everything about YouTube. The strategy of YouTube, why YouTube was created, how it works, what the developers of YouTube originally intended, what are some of the intentions now, and then YouTubers, like people who've been doing YouTube for decades or years, what are some of their pitfalls, what are some of the negative sides, what is behind the kind of shiny stuff, right? Like past the honeymoon stage, getting raw and real. It's like the 7-year itch in marriage or whatever. Like, you start to realize what are the raw, ugly sides of it all. And I think that kind of actively waiting and doing that research was so helpful, because in the same way that those who pine after being married but don't realize the realities of marriage and the realities of covenanting with another sinner, the realities of marriage representing Christ and the church, like the gospel, it's, not always the prettiest picture lived out because there's a lot of sanctification, etc. In the same way that it's helpful for people who just see it in that shiny light to be exposed to the realities of the difficulties, like you're more equipped and you can develop like ways to prep yourself or strategies to prep yourself. Nothing will ever prepare you for the reality of it, I will say, but you could at least not be in complete shock when those things hit you, or you have something in your toolkit to address the problems that come your way. So in that same way, I felt like that research on YouTubers, studying their stories, studying their pitfalls, for example, like burnout or just people ending up creating for the sake of the algorithm, losing their joy of creating altogether, and then they just quit YouTube altogether. There's so many videos like, I'm quitting YouTube. Using that for me to say, hey, I want to guard against that, because if I do feel like this is my calling, this has to be sustainable. And thereby, for me, my decision was I'm going to make 2 channels. I'm going to make one channel that's purposely just selfish in a way, just like what I enjoy, my pure creative outlet. No one's going to tell me like what to post or not, or what's helpful or not. It's just purely me enjoying the craft, enjoying God in the process, and posting whatever I want. That's like my more creative side. And then another channel, which is what I'm trying to do here, which is more outward facing. It is more considering of others and trying to be helpful for others. And there may be topics that like, man, I feel convicted to do, but it's not like, oh, do I really have to post about that? But if I feel convicted and that's what he's calling me to do, then I'll do more of, the calling side, I guess. That was a strategy I determined earlier on, or I like wrestled with how do I fit these 2 channels in together? Or like, is that a good thing or not? Or should I just have it all in one channel? But I made that distinction on purpose because I knew I still wanted a piece where I can just purely enjoy it and not lose the joy of creating. And it's a way that is such a restorative, life-giving time with me and the creator and like co-creating together, which it still blows my mind that we can do that with our creator, that he invites us into the process of co-creating. But then also this other side, which is more not like a job, but more intentional, right? More educational or more helpful or more trying to serve the needs of others. Another example being some fall into the issue of living to make content. So they're like kind of creating their lives so that the content would be interesting, like curating, creating, living out lives for the sake of the content rather than content being an overflow or outflow of your life. And in my case, or in the Christian's case, your content should be an overflow of your abiding in Jesus, right? You're abiding in the word. So if you're not doing that, you're pouring out from an empty cup, which is always when you get into dangerous territory where it becomes maybe more performance than it is, true transformation or true sanctification or true spirit-filled work. Because of that, like I am putting certain things in place in my life that I want to preserve, like living life and enjoying God and abiding in God and spending time within his word is key. If I don't have that, then there's no point in me making content because there's nothing to overflow from that. Even now, like there's many ways in which I'm like, oh, technically I could pump out more videos if I just spent less time like in the word or less time out in walks and such. But I know my purpose, I know my goal, I know my priorities. And those are things that I need to discipline myself to prioritize. Another common thing is selling out, or kind of when certain creatives end up just looking like one big advertisement. Alongside that, perpetuating, even in like Christian content spheres, kind of perpetuating a kind of consumerism that can seem unhelpful. I don't think it's bad to share like some of the products you like or things that you like, but sometimes I think it can get to the extreme of like trying to encourage everyone to keep buying stuff because there's like that cycle. It's like a pyramid scheme. Like that's how you make money, is if other people buy it. And so you're encouraged to encourage others to buy more. So it gets kind of tricky, right? Especially if you're relying on this as your main income source. Anyways, that kind of also is one of the effects or the kind of results or outputs of wrestling with these things, where I decided to make just a very clear distinction. So switching gears into, YouTube strategy and learning all the behind the scenes of that, I think it's good if you're in any craft, in any industry, to learn the game, like learn how people play the game. And as Christians, we have this kind of duty or we have this mission, I guess, to take that game and to translate it for kingdom purposes, or to take that and use it for good purposes, even if those things could be used for not as great purposes. So taking like these worldly strategies and channeling it for the kingdom, for eternity. And that takes a level of creativity, and it's not simple sometimes. Sometimes it's simpler to just follow what everyone else is doing, but it does take work for us to wrestle with, do we agree with these principles? Do we agree with these strategies? Or how are ways we can redeem these strategies? So for me, for example, I was very much in the nonprofit sector, and that was the sector that I wanted to pursue. I was very interested in the homelessness situation and poverty alleviation. So that's actually what I went to business school to do, is because I saw that the nonprofit industry just lacked, like there were a lot of people with really good hearts, really fluffy, really sweet hearts, but not the skills to back up the things they wanted to do. So there was a lot of in Ethiopia, there would be a lot of failed projects or poor implementation, mismanagement of budget, mismanagement of personnel, and you name it. So for me, I was like, ooh, these things are business skills. I want to take those business skills and use it for the nonprofit sector. Like use all those skills, but rather than using it just to get a profit, I want to use, not to say businesses are just about that, I don't believe so, but in the general sense, and use that instead for the mission, right? Learn how to manage teams well for the mission. Learn how to manage your resources well, because you have finite materials that are donated goods or funds, and you don't have profits on the line, but sometimes you have people's lives on the line. So trying to leverage these skill sets for a different purpose, right? Just channeling that differently. It's kind of like that. Like, how can we use these YouTube strategies or the game to channel in ways for good? And I'll talk more about what that looks like played out in a future chapter, or let me see, what chapter is that? Oh, it's in the next chapter. Okay, segue to the next chapter, chapter 6. Business strategies for a different purpose. This is where things get fun for me, because I don't know. There's something about me that I love, like taking these things that aren't usually used for that purpose and like changing the purpose and kind of like using it strategically for something else. I don't know why. I just get a kick out of that. But I think one of the most obvious things where you kind of have a different purpose for some of these maybe worldly strategies is just like your mission and vision in and of itself. For every Christian, we're serving God, like he's the ultimate boss, and we're serving others, right? Our jobs, our careers, our content, whatever it is all meant to serve God, to glorify him, and to love on others. So that's one area where it's distinct, but also things like the YouTube algorithm. Rather than focusing on the algorithm, focusing on what is helpful to people. Like what will add value, even if it's not a popular subject, even if it's not something that people like to hear, what is helpful in the ultimate sense. That's actually one of the scripture verses that I use in my verse kit when it comes to my content, which I'll share later. But another thing to consider is, especially in this day and age, how can we reflect God as his image bearers in ways that AI and tech cannot? So for me, I'm like, well, in the content world, there's this huge discussion about how we're like competing with AI and people who are leveraging AI. And I don't know. I don't worry about that. You know why? Because AI doesn't have testimonies. AI doesn't have suffering. AI doesn't have true real life human stories that they've lived. So they got nothing on me in those categories. Like, we might not have job security, but we got testimony security. We got suffering security. We got salvation security. So that's something that I feel like, on one hand, I thought that it might be not the best time for me to be doing YouTube because of everything feels oversaturated. Do I really want to make extra noise in this already noisy space? In my desires to want to go more analog, like, should I even be doing this? But then I realized, no, more than ever, our stories, our testimonies, our suffering, like these things matter, because AI can give us all the information we want, but we are meant to encourage each other through our stories and our suffering. That's like actually meant to help comfort others with the comfort we were given. Another thing, SEO. So SEO, it's called search engine optimization, basically helping people to find your whatever it is, content and such through search. So having certain keywords and such that are optimized for people to find you. And I think these kind of strategies are helpful because ultimately you want to have the right people find hopefully what might be helpful to them or what might be of interest to them. So like thinking of SEO less of like, how can I get all these people to click on my stuff and like all the views and things? Just think of it more like, how can I make sure that people who need this kind of help can see me, that I'm like, here, hello, I have something that I can share with you. I have truth here I can share with you. Beggars pointing other beggars to bread kind of thing. I think that's something that we should be strategic about, because it's like, if you want to preach the gospel and you want to preach it out into the world, but you're just preaching it in your room and not actually going where the people are, and you're just being an echo chamber to yourself, preaching it to yourself, that's like kind of bad strategy, right? So that's what I mean by reframing some of these tactics, for lack of better words. The other thing is one known, I don't know what you want to call it, but a CTA. It's a call to action. Basically, best principle is like, keep it simple, keep it one thing, because people are more likely to do one thing than they are to do, like if you give them multiple things, like subscribe and like, and sign up for my newsletter and do this, and people just like don't do anything. But if you're like and subscribe, or like sign up for my newsletter, or click on this link to blah, 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 then people are more likely to do it. Now for me, I'm like, because my main goal is not more viewers, more subscribers, monetization, I'm like, well, why don't I use the CTA? I mean, you could use it for that. I could use it for that. And I think that's fine. But it's like, well, if I can leverage CTA, I'm going to get people to be in their word. Like, go read your word. Like sometimes my call to actions are like, be in your word. Okay, open up that Bible. Speaking of call to action, my call to action to you right now is to read Luke 16, 1 through 13, because a lot of what I'm talking about is in ways inspired by that passage, whether directly or indirectly. But I find this passage so interesting. I have it open here right now, and I'll just like briefly go through because it really struck me. I heard a sermon on this while I was living in LA, and I was like, whoa, this is a very weird passage. So in the CSB, they call it the parable of the dishonest manager, but it's sometimes called the shrewd manager. So in this, Jesus is talking about this parable to the disciples, and he says, essentially, there's this rich man, and he has this manager, and he gets this report that his manager is like mismanaging his stuff and like squandering his possessions. That's what the CSB says. And so the manager, who's clearly guilty, he kind of starts freaking out and tries to think of what to do. He's like, oh shoot, like, what does he say? He says, I'm not strong enough to dig and I'm ashamed to beg, so what do I do? And then he comes up with this strategy so that when he is kicked out of his management role, that people will welcome him into his homes. So what he starts doing is going to each of his master's debtors, and whatever amount they owed, he would be like, slash that, discount them. He'd be like, oh, you owe him 100 things? Slash that to 50. Oh, you owe him this much? Slash that to half. Thereby making friends with these debtors. Now, the crazy thing is that seems like some shady business. Like, it's like, bro, that's just something seems wrong here. But then you see in verse 8, it says, the master praised the unrighteous manager because he had acted shrewdly. Like what? Like what? For the children, okay, and this is where it gets crazy. For the children of this age are more shrewd than the children of light in dealing with their own people. Okay, firstly, let's talk about what shrewd means. I looked it up on Google so that we can all be on the same page. Shrewd means someone with sharp, practical intelligence and keen judgment, particularly in business or tricky situations. Astute, clever, often calculating, but in a positive, resourceful way. So that's what shrewd means. The master praised this manager who was like mismanaging his stuff, his possessions, squandering his possessions, because he acted shrewdly. Like he was being resourceful and he was using like practical intelligence and keen judgment. And then it says, for the children of this age, so essentially like unbelievers are more shrewd, are better at taking care of their like earthly well-being than believers are. Like what? So it's rebuking Christians for not being as shrewd in the eternal matters as unbelievers are with their earthly matters. I think that should give everyone room to pause, because I don't know, it's just so crazy to me. And it says, continuing on, and I tell you, make friends for yourselves by means of worldly wealth, so that when it fails, they may welcome you into eternal dwellings. So I have a note here. It's probably from the ESV Study Bible, or maybe just my own. Like, use your money in such a way to prepare you for eternity. Win friends into the kingdom with your possessions, with what you have. Whoever is faithful in very little is also faithful in much. That's verse 10. And whoever is unrighteous in very little is also unrighteous in much. So if you have not been faithful with worldly wealth, who will trust you with what is genuine? And if you have not been faithful with what belongs to someone else, who will give you what is your own? And then it goes on to say, no servant can serve two masters. You cannot serve both money and God. There's like so much to unpack there, but the reason why I mentioned this here is just to say that, like, being shrewd, being strategic with the ways of the world and using that for kingdom and eternal purposes is like part of the game that we play as Christians that I think is helpful in how we think about, you know, some of these like worldly business strategies and such. Like, we can be shrewd and we can use it to usher people into the kingdom, to serve others, to love others well, to use these strategies to love people, to glorify God, to enjoy Him forever. And so I challenge you with whatever your calling, your job, whatever your season is right now, whatever you're called to do right now, like, think about how we can be shrewd with these things for eternal purposes. Like, oh, this passage is so crazy. It's so good. Okay. Okay, where am I? Moving on. So we're talking about strategies. Now I'm going to transition into the part that seems kind of like woo-woo to the world, but is a real thing for Christians. One thing for me is strategizing with God, bringing God into that process, because ultimately it's all His, right? Unless the Lord builds the house, those who build it labor in vain. So we should be doing this in collaboration with the Lord, because ultimately, like, we're just a part of the building that He's ultimately building. And so with that comes this concept that it blew my mind, and I've been doing it sporadically through the past year, and it's so cool. It is called business meetings with God. Like, I legitimately have a business meeting with God, like you would have a business meeting with your team or with your supervisor or whatever. Like, I legitimately have business meetings with Him. I have a template for it that I use. I have to shout out, this was inspired by a lady named Stephanie Gass, who, in this whole process of me doing research and everything for the many years, she came up on my feed talking about business meetings with God. I think it's her most popular video. And I was so inspired, and I started implementing my own version of that. Guys, it's like, I wish I could explain more, but basically everything in my channel and how it's come to be, it just was this step-by-step of God giving me like the next breadcrumb each time I would have this business meeting with Him. Because, like, ultimately, think about it. Ultimately, we don't even know what's going to happen tomorrow. We don't even know, we're not genius enough to know what is the best next step for us, or the most strategic, the most effective, impactful thing. Like, we have no idea. But who does? God does. God knows it all. He knows exactly what's going to happen tomorrow. He knows exactly what kind of, in my case, like, video you should be posting. He knows exactly what people need. He knows exactly, you name it, everything. And so doing these meetings, maybe I can talk about that in a future video about how these business meetings work. I don't know if anyone would be interested, but it's so cool to see God, like, laying out these steps in perfect timing and orchestrating things in perfect timing. And there are so many testimonies that have come from me just like following what He gives me next. Even when it comes to my videos, like, during these past years, I have lists and documents, and I have this whole Notion content hub page of like all these ideas that I've like listed out, outlines of, and like how to, you know, drag them into different piles as I'm doing certain videos in progress, editing and publishing and whatever. And no, even in the midst of me having planned out all these videos, like, ideally I would be like, as soon as I launch, I have this series of 10 that's going to be like bam, 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 bam. And it's going to be so strategic and cohesive, and it's going to make a lot of sense. I like had these plans of what video 1 through 10 was going to be like. None of the videos I've posted were the ones I planned, like, none of them. Absolutely none. And not to say that that's the strategy for everyone, but I think for someone like me who's a planner, the Lord wanted to use that to show me like, hey, it's not going to be based on your strategy, your skills, what you think is right. It's going to be on my terms and my strategy because I know better than you. And, like I didn't think people would be watching my videos this early on. Like I knew the game. I had studied this. Okay, I had studied this and I knew realistically that if I wasn't going to be taking all these strategic moves and playing the game in the way that everyone else plays it, it's going to be really slow. And I'm probably not going to see anything for like maybe a year or two until, the audience is found and like start getting a little traction. And then one of your videos starts getting traction. But it was crazy to me that the video that first got like kind of noticed a little bit on the algorithm was one that was so like, of all the videos, which were not planned, that one was completely unplanned because like God knew Wes Huff and Steve were going to have a podcast that day. I didn't know. God knew that if I knew that was happening, that I wouldn't be able to help but make a video on that, even though it's the most random thing. And even though that's nowhere in my strategy of videos to make, it felt like the most niche thing that like, why am I even posting this? But God knew, like all of that is part of his orchestrations. Anyways, all that to say, don't knock it till you try it. Okay, these business meetings with God, because they have changed the game for me. I do want to find a way to incorporate them more regularly because I kind of do them whenever I feel stuck or whenever I'm in like decision paralysis and don't know what to do next. And he's always like, anyways, I'm not doing a very good job explaining it, but that is one thing in terms of like woo-woo seeming strategies that for the Christian is not so woo-woo because the Spirit be working. Second thing that I do as an example is scripture inspiration. Like I have pages in Notion that are dedicated to my emergency verse kit for anything related to content. This is like the verses that I pull up if I feel discouraged, if I lose my way, if I feel like, what's the point of all of this? I have a list. I also have just a regular like scripture inspiration for what I'm trying to do in my content. And I can show some examples here. One thing that I've been reflecting on a lot is this verse, and it only came up like recently, like within the past year, which again is why this 10-year period of waiting, the 10 years of silence, just kidding, the 10 years was so helpful because I needed all of this equipment of passages, of sanctification, of him to hone and direct all of this. So the passage is 1 Corinthians 10:23-24, which is the one that says, all things are lawful, but not all things are beneficial. All things are lawful, but not all things build up. Let no one seek his own good, but seek the good of his neighbor. That became like such a key passage for my content purpose because I realized there's so many things I can say. I'm a very opinionated person, but not all my opinions are edifying and they're not beneficial. It may be lawful for me to say it, but it may not be beneficial. So this concept of doing what is beneficial, doing what builds up, not for my own good, but for the good of others, like that just became such a key theme in my praying for all this. So I highly recommend having like a scripture verse kit for like your calling or the direction or the guiding principles that you want for your job or calling. The other thing is how you do goals or metrics. So I have another video on success and how success looks different for a Christian. That helps me to define like how do I look at goals and how do I look at metrics. So for me personally, I'm not saying this is how everyone has to do it, but for me, because we are responsible for the inputs, my goals are based on my inputs. So it's like attempting to do one video a week. With all those things, I depend on the Lord too, but I don't make metrics based on fruit. Because I'm like, that's God's thing. Whatever fruit he wants to bear with it, like I'm going to leave that to him. That doesn't mean I don't track them though. So this is all, you could go see that video if you want, but I do track them. And I have a special page in Notion that's called milestones. And I track the milestones in the metrics. I don't call them like goals for myself, but they're just like, I call them milestones in which I praise God for the fruit that he's given. from my like meager little offerings of input that like really are not great, but somehow he can multiply it and he can do something with it and he can bless others with it. So it even shapes how I view like metrics and goals and what's, important to me. And then the last in this category is just the concept of things being not my plans, but his. And that's been probably the most humbling of all as someone who is, I've mentioned before, like a somewhat ambitious person, but because of my chronic illness things and such, I have plans, but I can't always follow through with those plans. Or there's just random obstacles that come my way, which prevent me from accomplishing things in the timeline that I want. But with that, every day, like I have my plans, but I leave it open-handed. And if that day the Lord has something else for me, I've really learned to be like, okay, he has something else for me. And I'm not going to get so caught up in it like I would have been. Truly, if I didn't have my chronic illness issues, this is actually part of the reason why I'm thankful for it. I know I would have depended on my own strength and my own will and my own, like, I can do this. Where there's a will, there's a way. And that would cause me so much stress and so much putting it all on my shoulders and thinking it's my merit or my whatever that got me to a certain place. That has been one of the blessings in disguise of chronic illness, is truly understanding the reality that it's like, oh my gosh, none of the fruit is from me, anything that I could bear or give. And when there is a good day, praise God, he's given me a good health day that I can actually film this video, that I can actually work on some things behind the scenes, the admin stuff or whatever it may be. I thank God for even those days that I can do something, because I know that even that is a gift. I'm going to take a bit of a drink break because I think I'm losing my voice. Intermission. The last leg. This section is more directly to the spiritual side of things and how that looks different, like very different than the average YouTuber, let's say. Number one, first and foremost, is being in the Word, abiding in the Lord, communing with God, abiding in Him. That is like first and foremost priority, because like I said before, like my content needs to be an overflow of that. Otherwise, what is it? An overflow out of this flawed, sinful being, which is not helpful for anyone. So truly making sure I'm abiding in Him, and that being a top priority. Like if I am not abiding in Him, then maybe don't make a video that week. That's just the tiers of the priorities, right? Because at the end of the day, this walk is not just about knowing the right things. Because even, like I always say, the devil knows God, the devil knows theology, but that doesn't mean he's living a spirit-filled life. That doesn't mean he's being transformed. That doesn't mean he's good. So we need to be in the Spirit. We need to abide, not just know, and not just information transfer. We are a part of the process. We're a part of that work of being lived out being in the Spirit, and thereby using that to hopefully help others, not just knowledge transfer. That only comes with communing with the Lord, right? And being in the Spirit. Also, there's just a lot of confusion and a lot of ways that things can go awry in your own heart or mind. And there's a lot of uncertainty. There's a lot of potentials to, compromise in whatever ways. So in order to be discerning, you need to know what's truth and what's right. And you need to have wisdom. And wisdom comes from the Lord. The fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom, right? So you need to be in the Word. I need to be in the Word. I need to be building the same house that the Lord is building, or else it's in vain. Number 2, prayer. Pray like even more than you think you need to. I think the Lord knew He really had to shape me through the many years of prayer, because there were just many not right things in there, like things that He needed to like really sharpen out of there. You really need to cut the fat out. So a lot of prayers have been poured out on this channel, and there were there's a lot of concerns, there's a lot of fears, there's a lot of ways things can go wrong, but I'm just thankful that we can pray and that the Lord does hear our prayers, that He does honor them. He listens, and who knows what's going to happen in the future with this channel, or ways in which I will make mistakes and go awry potentially, but if this channel is covered in prayer, I have faith that he will always bring me back, even if that means I need to shut everything down because he's like, hey, this isn't good for you. I'm well aware of that and thankful that he's doing this with me. Also, prayer for the viewers, for you guys. I think it's so crazy because I've been praying for whoever will be watching for so long also. I'm really just wanting this to be a helpful space and an edifying space and a joyful space. I'm a true believer that Christianity and God is not boring. He's not boring at all. So sometimes I wish, more of that like joy and zeal, especially in the denomination that I'm in. Sometimes I wish there was more of that joy and zeal and excitement and fun that I know God to be. Like, God is a joyful God, the source of joy. Anyways, I've been praying for the viewers, and so it's very actually surreal for me to be able to read your comments and even your prayer requests and be like, oh gosh, here it goes. And be like, this was the person I was praying for. These were the people that I was praying for that I didn't even know. It's like so cool how God works that way and how we're like all connected because we're united with Christ. And what blows my mind is that even though I may not be able to meet, like I've already met so many cool people on here. But even though I might not be able to meet some people in person, like I would love to, because I love meeting people and getting to know them more deeply, that we'll have all eternity to do that. And I think that's so cool. I think that's so cool. And I just wanted to add too that every time someone comments that they're praying for this channel or for me, I'm just so thankful. Like I honestly think that's the best gift that anyone could give me is prayer. And the fact that there are like strangers, but we're not really strangers, right? But that there are friends, brothers and sisters doing that I don't even know yet personally. Like it really does blow my mind. I know I say that all the time, but it really does. And I'm really thankful. So thank you so much for prayers because I don't know. I feel like the Lord's listening because I feel like I'm already living my dream life in a sense that I get to do what I love and I get to meet people that love God and want to glorify him. Like, so cool. Okay. Next thing is prayers for even the comment wall because, well, I recently installed community guidelines. So for those who are newer, you'll see that the community guidelines show up before you comment. That's because already, like, again, I just didn't expect some of the early videos to have traffic at all. And so I wasn't really ready for that. And so with the influx of views or comments or things comes some spicier comments sometimes or spicier personalities. And I just wanted to make sure that we're reminded as brothers and sisters of wanting this comment space even to be glorifying to him. And also just to be reminded that like, if there are, like there is always online, more difficult personalities or people who are just saying things in not the most loving way, not the most fruity of the spirit way, that we're gracious to them and we show love back to them because often they're the ones that need it the most. And it's like a way for us to be able to be like how I think of it, even in public when there's difficult people and how to kind of help me to think outside of myself and my own frustration, let's say, at the situation. I think of it as like we're secret agents of the Lord. And this is our time to shine because, I mean, Christians look like anyone else out in public when people are nice, but when people are not nice, like that's your time to shine. That's your time to show who your God is and how we live differently and how we think of things beyond just ourselves and how we're feeling about the situation. I don't know. It's kind of a funny thing that for me, like when someone mistreats me out in public or says something rude, I'm like, oh, this is our time. This is the time to shine. This is the time to represent him as secret agents of him. But also, I wanted to note that as brothers and sisters, that we should be loving to each other, even when we're being difficult to each other, because that's how Jesus says, by this, people will know that we are his disciples, is that we love one another. I was reminded of that verse recently and just wanted to remind everyone. So along with prayer, because I didn't expect the many brothers and sisters who have passed by this channel I didn't have a system for it yet, but I did always have in my mind that I would want to make sure I intentionally spend time praying for people who stop by even the channel or who watch regularly, whatever it may be. So making sure that I have on my list actually to create a database so that I can input anytime someone puts prayer requests in, and I have like a system to keep them in order and remember to pray, and also to track when people make requests so that I can keep that in mind when I'm making future videos. And so friends, also, if you do see prayer requests on these walls, I encourage you, my call to action for you is to spend like a couple, even seconds or so, just lifting quick prayers to those, because that's what we're all here for, right? To intercede for one another. So that's my CTA. My second one, if you didn't end up reading Luke chapter 16. Number 3, the waiting period. I guess this is more of like an encouragement for someone who is in the waiting period, but don't waste the waiting period. There are ways that you can wait well. Oh my gosh. Wait well and wait actively. During that waiting period was when I built systems in Notion, in my flows of how I do things, so that I would be able to, as soon as God opens the door, when I felt like he was going to allow me to do this and he started giving me hints and affirmations, I just started going all in and creating my systems or figuring out my workflows so that once he says go, I'm ready. I can just pull out all the stuff and just start recording. And so all of that was worth the trial and error, because there's so much you have to figure out in the beginning of anything. But those things that I had already thought through and had instilled in place just make it all the more smoother. Figuring out pain points in advance and such. In this waiting period too, keep praying, be in the word, find passages that can help be your guiding principles as you discern this calling or you enter into this calling. And just be open to the thought of God shifting your priorities or shifting you in different directions, or maybe even showing you that this is not your calling, and using that as a booting point to bring you on the actual path he wants you on, and using that as a mini detour. If it happens anything like how it did for me, or just all of my life really, anytime he booted me into the next call or the next direction, the go is never when I expect it to be, or was not in this case, especially not when I expected it to be. You'll never be fully ready for that. But a big source of inspiration in that waiting season was Nehemiah. I really encourage you to read and study Nehemiah. Alistair Begg has some really good sermons that breaks down Nehemiah, and that was so encouraging to me in that season. Yeah, Nehemiah was so strategic. Waited on the Lord, but used that waiting time very strategically, very well. In prayer, waiting on God, prepping things in advance, Anyways, moving on to number 4, identity in Christ. For the Christian, it's just so freeing. I will have to shout out this book. I think everyone who knows me personally knows how much I love this book, Freedom of Self-Forgetfulness by Timothy Keller. I love it so much that I still have copies, I think now, but at one point I had bought I don't know, some crazy amount of copies, maybe somewhere around 40 to 60 copies or something. And I would just give it out to people, to my friends, to anyone, because I loved it that much. And it was such a key resource, for lack of better words, that truly transformed this whole issue that I had been wrestling with about insecurities and the sense of self, self-esteem, that kind of stuff. For some reason, that book was just so eye-opening and giving me the framework for the freedom you get when you are self-forgetful. And there's so much freedom in that. I say this as someone who was the most self-conscious, insecure person. Perhaps we need another video on that. But that book and the concept of that book and the things that the Lord has taught me about self-forgetfulness along the way to where I am now, where I definitely do not care as much what people think, or if there's haters or something like that. And all of that was so needed to be where I am now, because if I was back where I was in that insecure, hugely self-conscious mode and trying to do this like I am now, 100% would not work. 100% would not work. I would be so afraid of, the fear of man would have been crazy, and I wouldn't be able to be myself. I would not be able to speak things that I'm convicted to say out of fear of the response or haters or being canceled. Oh, yeah. I mean, praise God. He really had to do a lot, though, in my life to get me to this point, because that book was actually what kind of sealed it for me, but he did have to put me through a lot to kind of maybe even kind of callous the side of me that cared so much in a way. I don't know. But anyways, identity in Christ really helps you to brush things off. Like, yeah, there's just so many things that I don't care about as much anymore. Another thing in identity in Christ is not having the identity in things that you do or your merit, your accomplishments. And so there's a huge temptation, I think, in this industry to produce, or like there's all these strategies, things you have to do, like make sure if you want to stay relevant, you need to post this often, this much, you need to respond to all the, you gotta blah, 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 blah. I like actually cannot, like literally physically cannot, which is crazy because like I said, I would have been the type to like want to do all of that. But because I know I can't, I know my limits, it's actually forced me to not buy into that rhythm or that mindset and just have to trust the Lord that my little amount that I'm doing, relatively speaking, relatively to what I could have done if I did this in my 20s, let's say, before my health stuff hit, that I just have to go by a different pattern. And I actually prefer this pattern, but I would have never chosen this for myself had I not, again, had to deal with health things. So again, blessing in disguise. Last but not least, number 5 is the check-in question of, is this helping me to glorify God and to enjoy Him forever? And I just add that there because I don't consider callings as this like stagnant thing. You don't come out of the womb being like, I'm going to do YouTube, or like you don't come out of the womb being like, I'm going to be a pastor, or come out of the womb and be like, I'm going to be a doctor. There's like different seasons, and you may be a doctor for just like 10 years of your life and that's it. Or you may be an Olympic figure skater, but like some injury means you can only do it for this temporary period. It doesn't mean you completely lost your calling. It just means God's shifting things around, right? You have different seasons of different kinds of callings. But in that, if I ever reach a point where this is not helping me to glorify God and enjoy Him forever, which is the chief end of man, then I have to call into question this whole thing. And that's okay. And that's good. And I need to keep that in mind. Or something needs to change. Maybe I don't have to give up the whole thing, but something needs to change. So that's a good check-in question for me to have, maybe for you to have, as you're going through whatever stage you are in your calling, your job, your vocation, whatever it may be. That is all. I do not know how I'm going to edit this down to be less than 30 minutes, but we'll see. Thanks for joining me for this video that was very niche maybe, and very, I don't know who would be interested, but here I am just throwing it out into the abyss. That's it for now. I'm going to try to recuperate my voice and then get ready for bed because it's late. Okay, thanks for joining, and until next time, bye.